All right, welcome to part 2 of the Wordle tutorial. So in the last one, we got the text file loading, and we got all the words parsed out into their correct array based on their length. So now we want to start getting the sort of the main menu and that type of stuff hooked up. So first, let's come over here, create a new event. So add custom event, and we'll call this show main menu. And we'll call that right here, right off the bat. So right click, show main menu, right, and begin play after we load all of the words. So we need a main menu widget. So let's go ahead and create that. So back over here in the content folder, right click, user interface, and we want the widget blueprint, and we want user widget as the parent. And we will call this the main menu underscore widget. And then go ahead and double click on this to open it up so we can edit it. So inside of here, one second, let me open this on my other one as well. Okay, so my mic. All right, so over here on the left, we want to add a canvas panel, and then we want to add a size box. And then in the size box, click on it, and on the details panel over here on the right, we want to anchor it to the center of the screen. Then we can just zero out all of these values. And then for the alignment, we want 0.5 and 0.5. I think I missed that one. And then we can hit size to content. And then we want to override the width to be 200, like so. So you should get something that looks like this. And then inside of here, we want to add a vertical box. And then inside of the vertical box, we want to add a horizontal box. So these are going to be for the left and right buttons. So add a text over here, and we want to make this kind of smaller, like maybe size 12, and we're going to call this the, what are we going to call this? The word length, and then I'm going to put a space here. You can put a new line if you hold down shift and press enter, it will make a new line, just so they're on different lines, so it's a little bit more room. And then we want to add a button inside of our horizontal box. And inside of that button, we want to add a text. So, and I'm going to rename this button to be down for making it go less, word length button. And then for the text inside of it, we just want to change this to be a negative sign. And then I'm just going to make this some other color so we can see it a little better, maybe like blue or something. And then the next thing we want is another text. It's going to be, again, inside the horizontal box. And then we'll just set this to like 5 or something. So this is basically going to be the word length that you want to use. And I'm going to center this as well. And then I'm going to take this button over here and just duplicate this. And then I'm going to hit this little right arrow so it's on the right side. And we will call this the same thing, but we're going to start with up. So this is how you will increase it. So click on the word length and come up here size and hit fill so that it fills up the whole thing. And then if you want, you can add a little bit of padding to the left and the right side of this text so it looks a little nicer. Maybe that's too much. Let's do like 5 and 5. Okay, so now we have this, and then we want to actually just duplicate this for the number of guesses as well, so we can modify that. So take this horizontal box, right click, duplicate, and we will rename this to num guesses, like so. Oh, let me do the new line as well, num guesses. And then I'm going to take a spacer node and pop it in here to the vertical box. And I'm going to move it so it's between these two, and then add a little bit of space between them, like 10. And then we want to make sure we rename these buttons so that they're not for the button length, but they're instead for the number of guesses. So we'll just rename this to down, down guesses button, and up guesses button. Okay. And then the last two things we need are buttons for play and quit. So I'm just going to take this guy and copy it and then paste it inside the vertical box. And then we will change the text on it to say play. And then we'll duplicate this one again and call it quit. So this is just a pretty simple little menu here, but I wanted to give the options for changing these things just to show you how it would be done. And then we're just going to duplicate this spacer and put one right here, duplicate it again, put it between there, and there we go. So now we have the visual part of it done. The next part we need to do is actually making it do stuff. So if we go back to the graph tab here at the top right, the first thing we have to do is hook up these buttons. So you can see on the left here, oh, I forgot to rename these buttons. Let's go back real quick. So the play button, we want to rename it to play button, and the quit button, we want to rename it to quit button. And then back to the graph tab, let's just delete all this stuff. I don't think we need it, at least not right now. So over here on the left, we have all of our different buttons. So let's start implementing them. Let's start with the word length first. So click on the downward length, do onClicked, and upward length, onClicked. And so inside of here, we want to increment this value. So in order to do that, we need to create a variable for this value. So over here on the left, let's create a variable, and we'll call it word length, and we'll change the type of it to an integer and make it private. And then drag this in, and we will say, so we want to make sure that this doesn't go above, or sorry, we want to make sure it doesn't go below a certain value. So I'm going to say 3 is the lowest you can go down to. So when you press the down button, we want to make sure that it is currently greater than 3 before we try to lower it. So we'll say greater than 3, and then we'll add a branch node. If you don't know how to do that, you just hold down B and left click, it will create a branch. So if the word length is greater than 3, then we can decrement it like so. And then we want to do essentially the opposite for the bottom part here. So we'll copy this, and this time we want to say if it is less. And so this is the other direction. So when we're going up, we want to make sure that it's less than 10 if we want 10 to be the max. And then we'll do another branch. And instead of decrementing it this time, we will increment it, which just increases it by 1. And so this is for our word length up, down. And we want to do the exact same thing for the number of guesses. So down guess button, we want to implement this, and up guess button, we want to implement this as well. I'm just going to take this and move it over here so we can kind of mirror it. And then we want to take this word length variable. We want to make another one of these, so duplicate it and just call it num guesses. And what you can actually do is just copy all of this, copy, paste, and hook this up. And then we just want to change these word lengths to use num guesses. And you can actually just drag these on top, and you'll get this little green checkbox, and then you release, and it will change the variable. So make sure you do that in all 4 places here. And there we go. So now we can just add a comment here. So this is the guesses up, down. So now we should be able to change that value, but it's not going to be reflected on the UI until we bind it to these variables. So to do that, we can real simply just come back here, click on our word length, and say bind to the word length. And num guesses, we want to bind to the number of guesses. Okay, and now we're almost done. We just need to do the play button and the quit button. So let's do the play button first. So onClicked. So for this, we want to get our game mode. So we'll just say get game mode. And then we need to cast it to our Wordle game mode so we can actually get access to the stuff inside of it. Cast to Wordle game mode. And finally, we want to start the round. So did I already make a function for that? I don't think I did. So over here in our game mode, let's just add a function real quick called start round and save it. And then come back here and drag off this and say start round. So all this is doing is when the play button gets pressed, we're just telling the game mode to start. Oh, and one thing I forgot. So we want to pass to the start round function the current word length and the number of guesses so that it knows what type of board to create. So open this up, and inside of here, we want to take in an integer for the word length and one more for the guesses. Compile, save, go back here, and now we have these variables exposed, so we can pass in the word length and also the number of guesses. And then the quit button is pretty easy, so we'll just hook up the onClick for that. And for this, we just want to say quit game, and we can specify that it's the get owning player that is the one doing the quitting. Okay, so now this widget is totally finished, and it will allow us to modify the word length, the number of guesses, and also allow us to start the game and leave the game. So now back in our game mode, let me go back there on my other screen as well. So inside of the event graph, we want to, inside of our show main menu event that we were working on earlier, we now want to create this widget. So right click and say create widget. And the class is obviously our main menu widget. This is the one we want to create. For the owning player, we can just say get player controller, since there's only one of them, it's just single player. And we want to take this and promote it to a variable. And then we want to call this the main menu widget because we're going to need access to this later. And then you can make this private. And I'm also going to add this to a category called widgets, since we're also later going to have a game over widget. And then next we want to add to viewport. And we want to set the input mode so that it is now UI only. So that way the player can interact with the menu and actually click on the buttons. So to do that, you want to say get player controller and set input mode UI only. And then for the widget to focus, you can pass in, well, I guess we can just get a copy of them right here. We can pass in our main menu widget like so. And then finally, we want to show the mouse cursor. So you can do that again off here. So show mouse cursor, or sorry, we want to, we want to show the mouse cursor. So you can click, I was getting confused. So show mouse cursor, set this to true. And then that is all we want to do for right now. So now let's go back here to our level. And before we run it, let's first add in a player start. So we'll say player start, drag this in somewhere, put it like above the terrain a little bit so you don't spawn inside the terrain. And then inside, actually, I think that's all we need to do. So yeah, let's just go ahead and play this real quick and see what happens. Okay, so cool. So we press play and we get our options here, and this will go up and this will go up. I realized I made one mistake, so we'll have to fix that in a second here. And then play will start and quit should close. Okay, so we just forgot to do one thing. So first of all, you can set these values to whatever you want for the word length. So I'm going to do 3 and 10. I'm going to keep these like I had. But for these guys, I want to change them to be 3 and 7. So I don't want to have more than 7 guesses. And then also I want to default these guys to be valid values. So the word length over here, I'm going to default this to 5, and I'm going to default the number of guesses to 6, since that's just what the actual Wordle game does. And then let's try this again here. And I'm going to switch this to new editor window as well, just so it's bigger. Okay, so we got word length, and we should be able to go up to 10 and not past it. Oh, I forgot to change this to a plus sign as well. We'll have to do that in a second. And this is going to go down to 3 and 7, 2, 3. So that's all working. Play doesn't do anything yet, which is fine. And quit quits. Okay, so let's just fix the plus sign real quick. So both of these guys, we just want to change to plus symbol. And there we go. That's what I was expecting to see. All right, so now let's see here. Where are we? So back in the game mode, we load the words, set input mode. Right, so now we can start getting into the juice of it inside of this start round function. So go to the start round function, and we want to start writing this. So remember, this gets called when they press the play button. So the first thing we want to do is drag in our words, and we want to check if we have words that are of this length. Because we don't have any words that are of this length, obviously they're not going to be able to play. So we want to do a find for our word length, and then we'll just do a branch here and make sure that that exists. If it doesn't, the play button will just fail right here, and when you press play, nothing will happen. If you want to add some sort of error or something, you can do that, but ideally your game should be set up so that that's not possible. And then from here, we want to do a break, and now this will get us access to all of the words that have this length. So all the words in our text file that have a length of 6, for example, will be inside of this array. And so we can just say random array item, and this will give us our random word, and we can right click on this and promote it to a variable. And then I'm going to change the name of this to be the goal word, and we'll make it private. So if at any point you want to test your program and you want to, like I did at the beginning, like specify the exact word that you want to be using, you can come here. Just as a note, make sure you do all capitalized letters, because we're going to be checking, like I said before, the system that we're writing uses only capitalized letters. So make sure when you're typing in a goal word manually here to debug, you use capital letters. But we're going to keep this random for right now, I guess. And then we want to keep track of a couple different things here. So we want to keep track of the current index that the player is typing on, and we also want to keep track of which guess he's on. Because, for example, if I run my other game here and I press play, you can see as I'm typing, I can type, but then I can also backspace, right? And it knows, if I still try to type, it knows, oops, I don't know what button I just pressed there, hold on. It knows that I shouldn't be able to go past whatever my current guess is. So I can only stay in these 5 lines. Even if I keep pressing a key, it's not going to go on to the next line until I press enter, right? And it knows if I keep spamming backspace, for example, it stays on that first one. So as soon as I press F or some other key, it will start typing. So we kind of need to handle all of that stuff. So to do that, we're going to make 2 variables on the left here. The first one is going to be called the current guess index. So this is which guess you're on. So when you're on the first row, you're on guess index 0, and then once you press enter, this will get incremented to 1 and 2 and 3. And obviously this is needed to know both where to put the letters when you're typing, and also, you know, if you've ran out of guesses and all that type of stuff. So that's our first one. We can make this private as well. And then I'm just going to duplicate this and rename it to current letter index. So this is the index of the letter you're currently typing inside the current guess, right? So both of these we want to default to 0 when the round starts, because you're going to start on the first guess and on the first letter. So drag both of these in and just leave it as 0. And then next we want to take our main menu widget and we want to remove this from the screen, because obviously we don't want the main menu to show anymore now that we pressed play. And then I'm also just going to set this to nothing, which will essentially set it to null, which is just a good habit to do when you're no longer using a widget or some other object. Just set it to null, so that way you don't have a reference to something that you're not trying to use anymore. And then finally, we want to actually spawn the board in front of the player, because right now it's just an empty oasis here, and we want to actually spawn the board in front of the player. So before we do that, we need to actually create the board. So back over in our content folder, right click, make a new blueprint class and call it, choose actor for the parent and call it BP underscore board. So this class is going to be responsible for spawning the actual tiles, is what I call them, which are the little squares with the letters in them. For now, let's just save this, save everything, and spawn it, and then we'll come back and we'll start writing the board class once we have it spawned. So back over here, inside of our start round, we'll say spawn actor from class. The class we want to spawn is obviously our BP underscore board that we just created. And then for the spawn transform, we want to right click and split this. And we're going to give it a location that is in front of the player and push back a little bit, or I guess in front of the camera and push back a little bit so that they can actually see it. So you can adjust these values once we finish based on however you want it to look. But these are just the ones I used and they turned out pretty good. So we're going to say get player camera manager. And we're just getting this so we get access to the camera's location. and we'll say get camera location. And then we want, like I said, we want to add to this the forward vector of the camera and some distance away from us, right? So we'll say get camera rotation, get forward vector from that, which is the way it's facing, the camera's facing. And then we want to multiply this by however far away you want the board to be from the camera. So in Unreal Engine 5, you have to right click these little nodes here and convert it to a float if you want to multiply it by a float, which is super annoying. I liked how it was before. In 4, it was way better. But anyways, multiply it by 1,000. And then we want to add this and hook this up to the spawn transform. So again, this is just spawning the board at the location of the camera and then offset it some distance in the direction that the camera is facing. And then once we have the board spawn, we want to save this as well. So promote this to a variable and we'll call it board. We're going to make it private. And then finally, we want to change the input mode to game only. So that way the player is no longer interacting with the UI. He's just typing. And we want to hide the mouse cursor because they no longer want to see the cursor because there's nothing to click. So we're going to say get player controller, set input mode game only, and show mouse cursor, and make sure you leave it as false and not true. And then one thing I want to do here before we forget is go back to the event graph, and inside of the show main menu at the very end where we left off, let's drag in our board and right click here and say convert to validated get. And what we're doing here is when we show the main menu, we want to make sure that the board gets reset. So the first time you play the game, there won't be a board yet. So this will just say is not valid and nothing will happen. But when you restart a game, we want to make sure that we clear the board here. And I just want to do this before I forget. So we just want to call a function here to destroy the board and all the tiles. So that will be the first function we'll write inside of our board, although I don't think we're going to fill it out yet. So over here, just make a function inside your board called destroy board and tiles. And again, we'll come back and write this later, but I just don't want to forget. So create this function, and then back in the game mode, we're just going to call that destroy board tiles. And finally, again, like we did for the widget, we're just going to set this to null since we're no longer using it. And there we go. Okay, so now we should be creating the board in front of the camera when the game starts. And right, so we want to actually add something to the board so we can see it, because right now it's just a totally empty actor. So inside the board, let's add a text renderer. So up here, add text renderer. So this is just going to be the title. So I'm just going to write Wordle, and then let me also change the horizontal alignment to centered. And then let me look at the size that I used. So I used 80. Yeah, in my other project. I just want to copy these values so I don't have to tweak it 1,000 times during the tutorial. And then if we do this right here, so the board's going to spawn below this, right? So the board would actually be spawning like underground, but we want the board to spawn more in the middle. So what I did is I took this text and I moved it up to about 400 on the Z so that the board can spawn under it without the actor being sort of under the ground, if you want to think of it that way. And then I also wanted to put a location like right here is where I want the top middle of the board to be. And so for that, I used a scene root, or a scene component. So just add a scene component over here and call it the board top middle location. And then for this, we want to put it slightly below the Wordle text. So let's just set this to like, make sure this is attached to the scene root. You have to drag it onto the scene root. I accidentally had it attached to the text renderer. So make sure these are both childs of the scene root, and then set this to 340. So it should look something like this. The root of your actor should be down here at the bottom. The text should be at 400, and the top middle of the board scene root should be at 340. All right, so now let's go ahead and run this and make sure that everything looks as we would expect. So we'll just leave these as 5 and 6, and then we'll press play. And okay, so a couple of things are wrong. So first of all, it's backwards, and we also have a camera, which you don't really want. So let's fix both those things real quick. So that's just because um, we forgot to rotate the board when we spawn it. So back in the game mode, just give it a Z rotation of 180, and then that should have it rotated the correct way now, which it does. And then also, we want to fix this mouse movement. So to do that, well, the reason that's happening is because it's using the default pawn by default. Like if you look inside of our game mode and the class settings over here, you can see the default pawn class is the default pawn, which has camera movement associated with it. Actually, we might just be able to set this to none. Let's try that real quick. That did not work. So I think you actually have to have a pawn, which is what I did before. So just right click, and we're just going to make a very simple pawn with a camera in it, nothing fancy. So it's like blueprint class, and then pawn. Let's call it BP pawn, doesn't matter what you call it. And then inside of here, the only thing we want to add is a camera. And you can even drag this on top of the default scenery. We don't even need the default scenery. And then inside of our game mode, in the class defaults for the, where is it, default pawn, just select our BP pawn. And then if we press play, now our pawn's in the correct spot, and we press play, we have no camera movement. And that's just because we made an empty pawn that doesn't do anything, it just has a camera. All right, so now what we need to do is start spawning these tiles. Again, we already know which word we've chosen. It's already chosen the word behind the scenes. We already know how many rows to spawn, how many guesses the player is going to get, and what the goal word is. So at this point, it's just a matter of, well, writing all that logic and spawning the tiles. So we'll do that in part 3.